level of interest we've generated in our project, Hands Across the Hills. Most of you are familiar with the project that we embarked upon 18 months ago. That was directly after the election. A lot of anger and hopelessness and depression and angst created by the election, and we wondered what we could do, and I came up with the idea of having an exchange of some sort with a community in Trumpland, and it took a few months, but we were fortunate enough to connect with Letcher County, Kentucky, in eastern Kentucky, right in the heart of Appalachia. As Trump as you can get, they were 85% to 15% in favor of Trump, which is just about the opposite profile of Leverett. As most of you know, the Kentucky folks came up here in October last year. Many of you attended the events, the community forum, the dance, the potlucks that we had. I'm glad you participated in that. And then since then, we worked hard to plan our return trip down to Letcher County. It was a 13-hour drive for them to come up here. We all actually flew down there. And the subject of the main event tonight will be our trip down to Kentucky, what we did, what we learned, and where we go from here. I'm going to preview the evening very shortly, but before I do, I want to acknowledge what we called originally the Bridging Committee, and then we named ourselves Hands Across the Hills. They're all the folks that you see in blue t-shirts here tonight, like this one. I want to tell you this, I've been on a lot of committees in my time, and this was easily the best, most cordial, most productive committee I have ever worked with. We worked as one. People had individual responsibilities. We each took care of our niche. Things worked really perfectly. So please stand up, blue t-shirts, and let's give Hands Across the Hills a big round of applause. And there's one other individual I would like to acknowledge tonight. If you read or subscribe to the Greenfield Recorder, you're all familiar with Richie Davis. He's a veteran reporter. He's done a wonderful job over the years. He was able to secure a grant from the Pulitzer organization to join us in our trip to Kentucky, and you've probably read his stories in the Recorder. And I think he's not done with that piece of the project. But Richie, will you please stand up? We'd like to acknowledge you and thank you. Okay, the way this evening will evolve, we're going to start with a slideshow so you get to experience what we experienced in Kentucky. Paula Green and Sharon Dunn will co-present that. And then after that, we will break into small groups. Each of you have a number. Each blue t-shirt person also has a number, and we'll lead these small group discussions that will run for 15 or 20 minutes or so, where you'll get to interact with the people who participate in the project. We'll answer your questions, and you get an up-close experience of what happened while we were down there. And after that, we'll reconvene for a general question and answer session, and then we will adjourn. Before we see the slideshow, I got an email this afternoon from Mr. Jim Perkins, who's on our committee, and Jim would like to say a few words. Jim?
I'm Jim Perkins. I'm Paula Green's partner. And Jay has graciously granted me this spot on the program to acknowledge Paula's leadership in structuring and facilitating Hands Across the Hills. For the past 30 years, Paula's work has been to heal divisions that lead to war or result from war. It has led her to Bosnia, Macedonia, Rwanda, Burma, Nepal, South Sudan, Israel and Palestine, and now to that most dangerous and chaotic superpower, the United States. She works with people who have perpetrated or experienced serious injury at each other's hands, facilitating the healing and reconciliation that must happen if there is ever to be peace. Paul accomplishes this carefully and intentionally building a safe space and facilitating graduated dialogues proceeding from shared human experience to the contentious and divisive issues. People learn that they can trust to speak their painful truth to those that they have seen as enemies. We have come to know, we blue-shirted people, have come to feel and know the injury that has been done to the people of Appalachia. And we have accomplished the building of caring friendships and deepening understanding. The love that has grown between us didn't just happen. And I want to recognize Paula's knowledge, skill, personality, and character, without which it wouldn't have happened. Thank you, Paula.
Take turns talking about the slideshow. We want to give you as full an experience as we can in the next half hour of our 3.5 days in Letcher County, Kentucky. And we'll do that through some narration and Pam's wonderful slides, and I want to thank Pam and Stacy for putting the slideshow together. We heard a lot of music. This is some of the music we brought home with us, some CDs. They really stay with their music. They haven't lost that tradition of their musical ability. And this was the first thing, one of the first things we saw when we came in, and we were a little anxious driving from the airport to Whitesburg, Kentucky. We had never been there before. We didn't know how we'd be seen and received. We didn't know how we respond to Trump stickers, Trump signs, and people's comments and the kinds of environments that would be brand new to us. So we had some anticipatory anxiety and nervousness, and it was dissipated pretty quickly. And seeing something like that was a way of our understanding that we were quite welcome there. We also tempered our anxiety by realizing that our Kentucky crowd came here not knowing us, which required a lot more bravery than we ever showed going to the welcoming arms of a dozen people that we knew. When we drove, it was early spring. It was still kind of wintry here. It was about 3-4 weeks ago, and we had no green on our trees yet. And we got down there, we were driving around. We flew into different places. There's no airports close by. The closest is 2 hours away. So we flew either into West Virginia or Tennessee or Western Kentucky. And as we drove, the redbuds appeared on the side of the road. It's their famous tree, and we happened to be there in the right time for it. So it was beautiful, and it was green, and I think it helped to assuage our anxiety. The mountains are lovely. This is a scene of open mountains. It's atypical. It's just prettier, so we put it up there. But most of the mountains are quite interesting. They drop sharply down into the valley, and there's a creek that's right in the bottom, and then a sharp mountain on the other side. There's not a lot of light. There's not a lot of farmland. They tend to put the houses along the areas where there's room, along the creek, at the bottom of the mountain area there. But it's not a spacious land, and it's hard driving around. You think our roads are a little strange in Leverett. You should try the roads there. They're really curvy and kind of wild, and it makes it kind of a hard place to be. And then they have an expression called a hollow, which they would never say is a holler. And when I looked that up online, they said the reason that it got called the holler was it started to be called that there, and there was so little input of other kinds of people coming in that no one ever told them that was maybe not the right way to say it. So it's known as a holler, and people tend to live on hollers. A holler is actually an indentation, a valley between two mountains with a creek in the middle dropping by, and an entire extended family will live along this holler. And we noticed they even have cemeteries on the sides of the mountains in the hollers because there's so little flat land that they don't want to use it for cemeteries. They have to use it for trees and vegetables or whatever they're going to use. So that's what a holler looks like. It made me think about its geography destiny. You know, in what ways does our land shape who we are? And what's it like to have no significant farmland? And what was it like for the settlers there who were Scots-Irish, who came there to that land and became foragers and hunters? Even if they had been farmers before, they couldn't be farmers in that region. There's simply no farming. And what's the significance now for this region where there's a real lack of economic development? And then you think to yourself, no airport, no interstate, no broadband, very isolated region that makes it very difficult to imagine how the economic development's going to happen. Hollers also kept out strangers, and that was also a part of their culture. And many people were considered strangers. The only thing that worked were the railroads for the coal. And coal became the only industry. The railroads came in 1912, came into the region, and that sort of set them up for coal as the only industry. You got one?
So we saw beautiful mountains, and this is a photo of strip mining. In the last 100 years of the mono-economy of coal extraction, there's been visible and irreparable damage to the beautiful mountain landscape of Appalachia. Stacy Leonard took another photo. Well, this is a photo of Mountaintop Removal. We actually did not see Mountaintop Removal when we were in Kentucky. I know I didn't, but I looked for a representation of it online because I thought that we all ought to take a look at the kind of damage that's been done to some of these beautiful mountains. Pam, the next slide. This is a photo of a trailer that someone took, one of our folks took, along the road when we were on one of our trips. And about 50% of the housing stock in the Letcher County area is mobile home or trailer construction. I found that for a half acre of land and a mobile home that was 1,200 square foot and not new, the price for that package was about $55,000. The median income in Letcher County for families is $29,181. So this gives you an idea of the kind of the economic distress that people are in there. There's there are very few jobs, and whereas at one time when the coal economy was very robust, the coal miners in the family were earning $60,000 to $80,000 a year, if not more. So this is the kind of really depressed economy that we witnessed when we were there.
So we landed in Whitesburg, which is the county seat, and that's what it looks like. The population is 2,100. It's almost the same as Leverett, but it's very different. It's more like a small greenfield than it is like a Leverett. As you can see, it's got a downtown, it's got stores and shops and library and county seat and various kinds of town things. So it's not quite as rural as it is, but it's a town of only 2,100 people. And Our partnership was actually with all of Letcher County. It's interesting, Letcher County is small. It's got 25,000 people in the whole county. By comparison, Franklin has 71,000 and Northampton has 160,000, which is wonderful. You can find out all this stuff just Googling it, but that's that. And we were partners with the whole county, so we were in the county seat of Whitesburg, but we worked in the whole region. And they've got 120 counties. In Kentucky we have 14, so Kentucky and counties are very important. And Apple Shop was the place that we focused. Apple Shop is a remarkable organization. It's Apple for Appalachia, not for Apple computers. And it was founded in 1969, which was the years of the war on poverty, when there was some attention and money poured into the region. And they are an economic and cultural development organization doing very outstanding work. They have rescued an awful lot of young people from despair, who can't find anything to do or any way to express themselves there. They have music and art and theater and radio and video and all sorts of things that they're teaching young people. And they make a lot of very reputable videos. And they, of course, are not representing the mainstream viewpoint. They're representing kind of an alternative viewpoint, which makes them unpopular with some people in town. We could not get any local publicity in their newspapers because they're not regarded well by the newspaper people, but they're regarded very well by those people involved in trying to make change in the region. And our partner, Ben Fink, who you all met last fall here in this room, is an employee of Apple Shop running their Culture Hub, which we'll tell you about. And he's a brilliant community organizer. He's an outsider. He introduces himself to people when he goes to meet them as a communist Jewish revolutionary. Those are all three words I've never heard of, I think, in the area. And he's up front. He feels it helps. He said it disarms people, and they take him in. And he didn't know if they would take him in. But they don't know what to do with that, so it just gets to be okay. All right. This is a very interesting project that Apple Shop is doing. It's restoring the eating environment. And that may seem a little strange until you think about the very large number of people with diabetes and obesity issues and other health and food-related issues. And this was a sign in a downtown store window, and you're going to see two more signs coming up in the next few minutes that talk about what they're doing. As Sharon said, people don't earn much. The average income is under $30,000 a year. When they were minors, it was over 60. And their food dollars are stretched. And it also seems to be some sort of a food desert there. There's not a lot of healthy food. I'll tell you a very funny story. When they were organizing for us, Nell, one of the women, called me one day. She said, "Paula, I'm in a panic. I don't know how to feed you people. You people was us, all of us." I said, "What do you mean you don't know how to feed us?" She said, "Well, we had all these potlucks in Leverett, and all the food was labeled." Why did you label all the food? They don't label their food. You know, we had vegan and no nuts and no wheat and no dairy and no meat and blah, blah, blah. It didn't make any sense to them. I said, "Don't worry, we'll eat whatever you feed us." But they were in a little tizzy about how to feed us. Opioids is another enormous problem there. Obviously, we have it here too. But there, it seems to have impacted every family we met. There are a great many grandparents raising babies and young children, because the young adult generation, I think, is probably the most despairing and most hopeless around lack of jobs in the future. And opioids becomes something attractive in a place where the unemployment rate is so high. Eastern Kentucky ranks among the U.S.'s 10 most opioid prescribing counties, which means the doctors are implicated in this. They're prescribing the stuff, and people were selling it and stealing it and whatnot. And another headline I saw today was that drugs kill more people than cars and guns combined. And Kentucky has always been in the forefront of that opioid crisis. So that's a serious issue for them. So let's look at these other slides. Let's how they're educated. This is it's wonderful education for people who may not be thinking about these things. What you're served and what one serving could really be. So encouraging people to eat what they put on their plate, not what the restaurant might put on their plate, which is a very overfull plate. And then there's another one on rethinking what you drink. Obviously, there's an alcohol problem there too. That's not what this is talking about. This is talking about the soft drink issue and the diabetes and how all of that relates. So it's really hard for them. And here's another interesting drink. Kentucky Mist Moonshine. Once upon a time, everybody had a still in their backyard. And that's how moonshine travels around the region. Now, it's legal. It used to be illegal. It was a dry area until quite recently. So now there's a popular business. And I'll tell you the truth, some of our people had a really good time in there. It's the first time for Leverett people to have moonshine. They really took a hit of it. Also note the red ribbon on the door. We were there during the Kentucky teacher strike, and the red ribbon was solidarity with the striking teachers. So that was a very nice thing for us to see. We met the mayor, and the mayor wants to set up ecotourism as a way of making a livelihood for people in the region. And I thought if you combine it with drinking, maybe you'd have something. We also acknowledge that we have all these problems. We have poverty, we have homelessness, we have opioids, we have racism and sexism and classism and many other problems. And they are so sensitive to the fact that they have been the ones in need of help, as seen by other eyes for such a long time, that we just were very careful to make sure that we always said, yes, opioids are in Hampshire and Franklin counties also. Yes, we have obesity, we have diabetes, we have all kinds of problems here too. It's a great equalizer, and it's also our truth. So we wanted to acknowledge that well.
I wonder if you recognize the woman that's in the middle of that group of people. That's Gwen Johnson. And she was up here in October, and you might remember that she said that she had coal dust in her blood. One of the things that we discovered when we got to Kentucky is that they very much wanted to show off to us some of their wonderful community building endeavors. And Gwen is at the heart of one of them, called the Hemphill Community Center. Here she is in this photo introducing her team. And this is the team of people who bake and who make food for a community dinner. All of them are recovering addicts. Most of them, if not all, have been in jail. And Gwen has given them jobs. They are terrific workers. They adore her. And we ate a wonderful Friday night dinner at Hemphill Community Center, which was one of their, what Gwen has done is there is a Friday night pick-and music and community dinner. So there was a band that played after dinner. There was dancing. Stacy Leonard won a cake and a cakewalk. And one of the things I want to tell you, probably saw in Richie's story in the recorder, is that Gwen's Bakery has been named the Black Sheep. When she was up here, she visited the Black Sheep, and we traveled down and we brought her some, I guess, mugs and other material that have Black Sheep on them. And and I think she's probably in touch with Nick, or could be, for advice about baking. She's trying to bring whole wheat bread to Eastern Kentucky. So this is the team, part of the team in the kitchen, baking and making food. And we had a most wonderful and very fulsome dinner that night, followed by a lot of dancing, which was also really fun. And this is the band that was playing. And somebody said to me, you'd have to pay $10 at the Iron Horse to hear something as good as these guys. They were really wonderful. And this one,
The saddest story here is a story about miners. This is a mining memorial that was right outside the door of that Hemphill kitchen and catering company. I can't think of any other industry in the world, except maybe the military, that kills as many of its employees as coal mining does. They die from mining accidents immediately, or they die over time from black lung disease. The insurance companies make it tough because they do whatever they can to resist paying the widows who were left. These are all men who were in the mines. The coal dust apparently is getting more difficult for them to breathe. There's more of it's in their lungs because of the way they're mining coal now with machines. There's more dust. The more dust, the more black lung disease. And this memorial was a beautiful thing. The list of all very many numbers of miners who are from that town and the towns around it who had died. It's really hard. In the old days, the first industry there was timber, and the timber barons came in, and they had fancy contracts, and they said to these people, sign here, and people couldn't read. They put their thumbprints on, and they lost their trees. And all the trees were taken away. And then the coal barons came in and said, sign here, and they signed again. They lost what was on the ground, what was under the ground. They lost everything they owned, and everything was taken out. And Ben, when he started this culture hub, got the idea of a phrase called, we own what we make. So let's keep things here, because what the history of this whole region has been nothing but drain. First the timber and then the coal. So this was a trip to a coal mine. This coal mine has been shut down. There's almost no coal mining in the whole area anymore. And this has been shut down. And it's now a museum, and it's in Harlan County. Harlan County, some of you elders may remember, was the site of an extremely famous strike. There's a movie called Harlan County, USA that was made in 1976 that I highly recommend. You can get it through Netflix or someplace. And it's a very poignant story of a very, very long strike, and the owners bringing in scabbies and people from the outside and a lot of violence. And somebody there told us that on the top of that hill, where the grassy area is above the portal, they would have machine guns to shoot strikers. Of course, the museum doesn't talk about those things. The museum talks about the industry itself. And we go into the mine. So here we are going into the mine. And here we go, going into the mine, this little train. And when you get inside, there's kind of dioramas with figures who have microphones and pretend to be talking, not real people standing in there, but just dummies. And telling the story of the history of mining from the beginning. And now you can see us going in. This is live if it works. There we go. So that's the guy who's pulling us into the mine. At the peak of the mining industry in the United States, there were 900,000 coal miners in the U.S. It's an enormous industry. There's 20,000 left in the whole country, and not many of those are in Kentucky at all anymore. In Kentucky, it's the lowest number of coal miners now in 118 years. So imagine you lived in a place when there was no other employment. There was nothing else to do. Now some people leave. That breaks up the families. That destroys the businesses. That reduces the population. It's tough on the morale. But those who stay really struggle. And the Culture Hub in Appalshop is doing whatever it can to create a vital community on the ashes of the coal. And we'll be talking more about that. Okay, here we go. Your turn.
Here we are at the Mountain Shrine Club in downtown Whitesburg. This is a community breakfast. This was the last one of the cold weather season for Whitesburg. The Shriners, we were told in advance, were really probably the most conservative group that we would meet while we were down there. And Appalshop was very interested in having us go and have breakfast with the Shriners and to tell our story about our Hands Across the Hills endeavor to them. There was a presentation that we made about Hands Across the Hills to them, and a number of us spoke. There's Jim up there, and Stacy narrated the slideshow, and Paul eventually did take, we had questions that were asked of the audience, and a number of people wrote in their questions, and the most interesting one, the most serious one, I think, was you folks are educated and developed, and what do you think you owe us? Which is a really interesting question. And it's, I do think that Paula answered that she's always been committed to equal justice and to fair wages, and that our group itself, Hands Across the Hills, was dedicated to working together with folks in Letcher County, but that we had not come to study them, nor had we come to solve any problems for them or push a solution on them. And there's always a push and pull there. I think that there's a need for assistance, there's a need for ideas, but they do not want outsiders coming in and just delivering these solutions to them. They want to be collaborative about it, I think. In the afternoon, that was breakfast. In the afternoon, we went to the Cowan Community Center, where there was that day a farmer's market, and this was a staged reading of a play called The Future of Letcher County. It was actually constructed out of stories that were gathered up from folks in Letcher County through storytelling circles, which is something that the Apple Shop folks and other folks in Letcher County really are using to gather up material about the challenges that people in that county face. One of the things that we found when we were there is that folks in Kentucky love to tell stories, and they tell stories all the time. And we realized how difficult it was for us to tell stories. At the end of this play, the next slide, yeah, the audience circled up, and a dramaturge who was wearing, unbelievably, a UMass t-shirt. She was living in Kentucky. I think she had gotten an education up in UMass, but she was down there. But in our honor, she wore her UMass sweatshirt. She said, "What in this play moved you?" And the answers that we gave it were, we saw in the play and acted in the dialogue the economic distress of the area, the awful choice that young people make. Do I stay here and really try to find a living? It's so hard to find a good living here. Or do I move away from my family? The opioid crisis, the struggle to move away from a definition of as white trash. People, that was an issue that came up. And I think Paula even mentioned earlier that a lot of the grandparents are raising their grandchildren. So there were many of the issues that Letcher County faces that were brought up in this play. And now Paula's going to talk about our dialogues.
So many of you probably want to hear this more than you want to hear other stuff. It's about the dialogue, and of course I want to talk about it because it's the most interesting part for me. For me, it was the heart of the program. It's why we did this in the first place. And it's where we could build real relationships, develop as much trust as could possibly be done between us, and get past the entrenched stereotypes on both sides. Because their stereotypes of us were just as strong as our stereotypes of them. We are foreigners to them, as they are to us. I was delighted to discover that in many ways we could pick up where we left off last fall. We were not starting from scratch. We had 3 very solid days of dialogue experience here, and it didn't go away. In fact, it was stronger. And we went very deeply into some very critical issues: Trump, guns, media, and classism, which is a big issue. Class divides between us, privilege between us, that people don't usually just talk about. And I think we were able to do that because we had laid the foundation last fall. I don't think we could have gone in cold the first time and gotten to that depth. And I'll be sharing with you some of the questions and topics that we talked about. We had about 8 to 10 hours of dialogue in the course of the weekend. They were closed, they were just our group. And our videographer was in there also, but he's not allowed to put anything into the video that people don't want in the video. And we began on Friday, our first day, with What makes the most sense, starting with the present moment? What does it feel like for both groups to have us in Whitesburg? What has stayed with you over the past 6 months? And what do you hope for this time? And here are some things we learned about their community. We learned that Tyler, one of the young men who was here, decided to stay in Kentucky and not leave because of us, because he learned from us what a difference he could make if he stayed there. We learned that Nell had reconciled with her very conservative Trump-voting brother. She's not a Trump voter. We heard so much about their humiliation from all the years of people going down there to photograph them and try to fix them. And we didn't step on their story. We understood that this was their story, their way of thinking. And people wanted to own their story for a long time, which we didn't want to do. They wanted us to see their resilience, which we did, their hospitality, their dignity, and their strength. And we felt all those things. That was our experience. I'm not romanticizing, just observing and being graced by their kindness and their warmth was very important to us. It really helped us understand the soul of these people. An explosive moment came in the first dialogue when Gwen Hemphill, wonderful woman, black sheep woman now, said, "Aren't you excited that Trump is going to have Jerusalem be the new capital of the new embassy?" It's strange we're talking about it today, but I am. I gulped and I thought, I want to stay in facilitator mode, so I sure hope somebody else jumps in. And of course, all my friends jumped in. And people told her what we thought about that. And I spoke to her privately later, and I told her I had worked in the Mideast for 25 years with Israelis and Palestinians together, and what a tragedy, mistake that was. And she said, well, the only thing I know is what my preacher and the Bible tell me. She said, educate me. I thought that was so beautiful. It was such an example of the openness. I want to learn, I don't know. Fox News is their news source, and the church and the Bible. And I spoke to her for a long time, and she said, oh, I'm going to think differently about this. So I was very impressed by the openness, and it wasn't just Gwen. That was a Gwen story, but there were stories about others that were the same way. We heard how much compassion toward refugees and immigrants they developed, especially from hearing Debbie's Holocaust story, but understanding how many of us had refugee and immigrant stories in our own lives. They didn't have that, they didn't know about it. And they shifted on that one also. We learned that we ask endless questions. And they don't ask questions. That's the way we communicate. I don't know how else to communicate. And they don't ask endless questions. They don't ask questions at all. And we were perplexed. So why don't you ask questions? They said, it's not polite. Nell talked about how in her family, her father always made sure that all the kids, there were 17 of them, registered to vote. But they never knew how he voted. In my house, we talked about it all the time. From the time you were this big, you knew who your parents were voting for. So it was very different cultural issues that showed up there for us that I found fascinating. On Sunday, we began the dialogue with my asking people to move into triads, mixed triads, and to generate a couple of questions they wanted us to talk about on the weekend. And I knew very well that it would take us 2 weeks to go through all those questions, but I wanted to stimulate the asking of questions and the framing of questions and seeing what we came up with. And I would like to read you some of those questions because they were pretty phenomenal. And it will give you an idea of the focus of dialogue if you hear them. So here's a sample of questions that Kentucky people asked us Leverett people. How did your image of us change after spending time here? So Trump questions. Do you have a deeper understanding of why people voted for Trump? In what ways does it matter or not matter who we voted for? It's a great question. Why can't we overlook Trump's questions of character and focus on the good things? And then 2 very poignant questions. 1, is there a way of overcoming the stigma of feeling like white trash? Just break your heart hearing that question. coming from somebody in our circle? Is there a way to overcome that stigma? And the second one, another powerful question. Why did you trust us as your guests as in your homes in Leverett? Never occurred to us in a million years not to trust them. But in their community, because the opioids and the poverty, there's a lot of stealing from people. And people don't feel safe in their homes. That was really revealing to us. So sample of questions asked by our group to the Kentucky group. How did the image of us Massachusetts folks change after you met us? And what have you learned about us? When will you feel safe letting go of coal as the image of the future? And why do you think Trump voters still support him? It's tough to get an answer to that one. And then 3 shared questions that were very powerful. How has the disparity between our respective income privileges and conditions impacted our work together? It's a fabulous question. How will we know if all the work that we're doing to make this happen is worth it? And lastly, how do we describe to other people that what we have experienced about bonding, caring, learning from each other is fundamentally more crucial than convincing, changing another, critiquing someone else, telling them they are falling for fake news? And that was kind of a shared question. And that's the question that I want to leave you with. That's the message I want to leave you with, that we got past Trump and all the hot button issues. It stopped mattering. It's just not where we put our focus. We saw each other as more full human beings, with our joys and our sorrows, our tragedies and our triumphs, with a kind of respect, acceptance, and love. And people started to use the word love, which we never would have predicted a year ago. We did not know this was possible between us. And by the time Sunday night came around and our circle closed, it became clear we were not going to say goodbye. That could not be an operative word. It was kind of a big surprise to us. Your turn. You want me to show those questions, please?
Yeah.
So here's some dialogue circles. And here's the questions. The questions are up on the wall. You can see them on the wall. And there's one more. And there's a close-up. We grouped the questions together, so we had a Trump clump, all the Trump questions, and then all the questions of other categories we put together. And it turned out to be very rich. Okay.
One thing I want to add to our day on Saturday that I neglected to say is that I was so impressed by the Culture Hub anniversary celebration that was held at the Cowan Community Center. This is something where 22 organizations have been brought together. Ben Fink of Appleshop has been really the leader in doing that. And these folks are working to change public policy, to start businesses, to reinvigorate the communities there. And we were there for dinner, and then we heard some presentations from some of these different organizations. And we really saw the kind of vitality that is happening and starting in Letcher County. This slide back here shows us on Sunday night. This was our final gathering of the official weekend. We were in Tyler Ward's restaurant called The Thirsty Heifer. And we were in a circle, and we each said a word that expressed how we were feeling, and the words were excited, impressed, exhausted, because we were exhausted, thrilled, and we also brainstormed about what are the ideas of things that we can do in the future together. And the brainstorming brought together questions such as, ideas such as, let's work on gun safety or some kind of gun control together. There are some ways in which there is some commonality. It's very little, but it's there, and if we could work on it, it would be good to have Letcher County, Kentucky, and Leverett, Massachusetts working together. Another was, are we going to outreach to another geographical area, possibly, in our work? And then this final moments before we made our really emotional goodbyes was an exchange of gifts, and this is a gift of a drawing, a piece of artwork from Leverett's Julie Collier of an owl, and Apple Shop is going to be hanging that in their offices. And Paula?
Okay, coming to the end of this segment, here we are on a mountaintop. All of us together, this is at the end of our weekend before our Sunday night closing. And the land is beautiful, but the land is profoundly scarred. And the people are beautiful, and they're kind of scarred too. But in some ways, so are we all. And the end here is going off into the sunset, which kind of implies a finality, but we don't have a finality because we were not in the mood for going off into the sunset. And what we wanted to do was to talk about the things that are next, which Sharon just gave you. So there are many groups that are active. We had about 25 brainstorms, and about 10 of them have committees, and maybe we'll have an assault rifle campaign, or summer youth exchanges, or support for Dominic, the trans kid who came up last fall, who needs our support, or bringing the roadside theater from Kentucky to Franklin and Hampshire County. So we have some pretty nice ideas cooking. Our website will remain active. We might want to do some other dialogues of various sorts with various people, maybe a new state, maybe a new region. We don't know yet. We're working on it. And we hope to develop a manual so people can try to do some of this themselves if they want to. And the divides are getting ahead of us, and so we have to keep moving fast because bridging these divides is vital for the future of our country. If we're going to have any kind of shred of democracy left, we really need to reach out. So we hope you inspire you to reach out wherever you can and bridge divides in your family, your community, your workplace, and around the country. And now we're going to shift. When we had the reflections after the Kentucky people were here, we did small groups, and everybody loved it. It's a little bit of chaos, but it's worth the chaos. So here's what's going to happen. In a minute, we're going to turn on the lights, and we're going to have table groups, and somebody in a blue shirt is going to lead your group.
Welcome. When did you get that? I never signed up. I do go.
Of a woman, Gwen actually, who as a young woman was out on a date with this young man. They ended up back at the young man's home. His uncle was sitting on a couch, cleaning a gun or holding a gun. Her boyfriend walked by this guy, and the gun went off, and he was very, very badly wounded. They got him into a car. They went down the hill. There was a train across the crossing, and he bled to death in her lap. And she, just a couple of hours before, had been having a conversation with Kip. A couple of hours before telling us the story, she'd been having a conversation with Kip about guns in this dining room we were eating in. She said, looked around and told Kip, I can guarantee you there'll be at least 6 guns in this room. And then she talked about having guns herself, and then the whole issue of what makes you safe. And guns make her feel safe. It's a dangerous world. She goes and lives with her mother because her nieces and nephews come and steal stuff from her mother. We learned a lot about guns, and we learned a lot about how difficult this whole situation is. Like everything else, we were often in a state of cultural dislocation.
The assault rifle thing came up because the week of the Parkland murders, Gwen and I and another woman from here and another woman, and now also from Kentucky, were on a public radio interview. And before we got into the formal part, we had connection to each other. We were chatting informally, and I said something about what had just happened at Parkland. And the two women from Kentucky felt, as I felt, concerned about Parkland. And they said, we like hunting guns because we eat what we kill, but we don't want assault rifles either. So we got the idea that one of the campaigns we might start might be an assault rifle campaign. Whether we'll get it off the ground or not, we don't know, but it was certainly an idea that came to all of us. I asked if there were any demonstrations in their schools or in their town, but none of that had happened. That requires, I think, more organizing than like I see there. Anybody else have comments on violence of any sort? Domestic violence, gun violence?
We didn't hear about domestic violence, at least I didn't, and I would have been very surprised if we had. They were not revealing much of the real pain that was going on, and so we got closer to being able to ask each other questions, but this wasn't let's bare our soul to each other, and certainly let's not bare our souls to these Northerners who've ripped us off in photographs and movies and stories for decades.
This is another Gwen story. Gwen was telling me that she had a boyfriend, and the boyfriend, they were enjoying each other, and then one night he told her that he was part of the KKK, and she said, I want nothing to do with that, and we know that the white supremacists were unwelcome there. So there are areas where we think that we can work on things together.
Okay, another question from the floor, please. Did you ask all your questions already? Here we go. Stand up.
I was wondering about Apple Shop and whether it will thrive and how it's funded, and if the media is against them, what will help turn that on?
Great question. Sharon's already started. Sharon.
Well, as Paula said earlier, Apple Shop is about 50 years old now. It's very well established. It has very good funding. At the end of at the bottom of their homepage, you can see all the different National Endowment for the Arts and Humanities, different foundations. They have a very robust development crew. And I think Ada Smith is the head of it. And very, very aggressive fundraising. I think their director, Ben Fink, is out there on the road all the time, meeting foundation heads and other sources of funding. So I think that they're probably very, very likely to endure for quite a while. That's what I think.
Yeah, you mentioned media, and while the local media is very much either against them or indifferent to them, the national media has taken note, and if you go to our website, you will see, I think it's a 20-minute clip that was on National Public Television. Judy Woodruff narrated it, and it profiles Apple Shop. It's very impressive, and they've been featured in the New York Times and some national magazines, so they're getting recognized. And one thing that either Ben or Herbie Smith told me was that when their development team goes around to try to generate funds, if they can get the individual from the foundation to come visit their facility in Whitesburg, it's a done deal. They get the money. They're so impressive in what they're doing. And I believe their endowment is $5 million at the moment.
And we were there for their anniversary, and they had a table full of funders who'd come for that event.
So, you're in good shape.
I know before you were going, there was an article about the building of a prison there. Did that come up as you were exploring economic opportunities?
sad story. Who wants to start with it? Someone else, come on.
Tell the minister story. So.
Yeah. So the minister story that Tom's alluding to is that we went to this very old Baptist church, which still functions as it did many, many years ago, where we were regaled by these male singers who were singing old Bible songs from the Bible books they had with them. They would just pick out songs and then randomly sing. They were almost like Gregorian chants to me, the way that it sounded.
Singing.
I'm sorry?
It's called line singing. Are you familiar with it?
And so they were all men. There were two women who were kind of near them, but they had to sit in some bleachers way up high. One of them sang, but the men all sang. And one of them proudly told the story of how he had a major part in getting the prison to come to Letcher County. So that was hard for us to hear because most of us in that room were us, and that's not what we really wanted to hear. But he was very proud that they were coming. And my understanding is that he's either a superintendent of schools or some kind of administrator in a large school system.
Okay. So you all correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is that when we met with the mayor, he was also very excited about the prison coming because he saw it as economic development and that I think they said over 300 people would have jobs or whatever. So there was that kind of simplistic line of thought, but there were also, I talked to a number of people who were really torn about building our economy and building our economy this way, you know, by bringing in people who are also being mistreated and contributing to that role and taking the downtrodden, and which has been their own experience. So there were some people who were very conflicted about it. There was, you know, that I spoke with, some people who felt that they needed the economic development but wished it was something else, but this is all that they were offered. And in fact, I think there are 3 or 4 major prisons in Kentucky. 3?
In eastern Kentucky.
Yeah.
And the Bureau of Prisons said that in our country, there isn't a need for any more prisoners, but their senator got $44 million. $440 million. Start all over. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So there are 3, this would be the 3rd major prison in eastern Kentucky. And the Bureau of Prison Affairs, our federal, has stated that there is no need for another federal prison, but their senator was able to get $440 million to put this prison in, so it's hard to say no to.
It goes back for me too to the old story of poor white people oppressing poor black people, having one leg up because they're not in prison, and the black people and brown people are in prison. And as I told you, this place is very remote, and the families of those prisoners don't live there. They're going to come in from Washington, D.C. and Baltimore and other major cities, and they're not going to be able to see their families, which contributes to worsening conditions for people who ever want to get out of prison. So for us, it's appalling, but we're not there. Sarah?
One of the artists that we met calls it slicing and dicing, dividing people up. They gave us a copy of a book called Watches of the Night, and two key things in here that the author talks about the gargantuan powers, even in the 60s and the 70s, that were all in collusion. Daria Fisk from Greenfield was one of the Appalachian volunteers. They researched the intersection of land trusts, oil companies, New York holding companies, and the research was called 40 Thieves.
Yes, these people live in very oppressive conditions. Yes, please.
I was regarding the school superintendent who was so enthusiastic about the prison coming in and the economic opportunity there. I was just wondering if there was any, or will there be, do you think, any organized attempt to enlighten him, given that he's in charge of children's lives and children's futures? as the, given the horror of jobs like that, how poorly paid they are and how awful.
He was the leader of the church singing. We didn't meet him personally. He just announced this up front. We did talk about it with our participants because we have relationships with them and we can talk about those things. The Baptist church singing was pretty interesting. It's called Old Line Baptist Church. And the leader sings a line and then the congregants repeat the line, but they embellish it. And that was done for people who were not literate. Only the leader had to learn to read, and the rest of them would just sing the lines afterwards. It was quite an experience for us, but very sexist. Becky.
We got to come, in the fall, and we got to have things after you all had the folks from Kentucky come here, and you had public events where we could come and listen before. And now we're getting to ask all these questions now of you. Afterwards, we want to get the whole debrief. We want all the details. You've talked about they don't ask questions as much. And being from the South, I have some knowledge of that. I'm just curious if you got any sense from them about what kind of debriefing is going on there and went on there after they came up here, of the people there wanting to know about the strange creatures that live up here.
Nell said to us when she got back, everybody wanted to know what it was like. But it was more individual curiosity. They did not organize a major event like this. So I don't know what that was about. But people were quite curious. And of course, there's the great line that Letha has in the first film, which says, yeah, it's okay to go up there, but just don't bring one back.
We sort of talked about this, I think Paula mentioned it, but apparently on the van ride back, they really had a wonderful time discussing what kind of nutty people would have all those labels on their food. It provided endless amusement for them.
And I shared with some people who were in my group back there that a number of them told me they were surprised at how rural Western Mass is. And many of them had never been up to New England or on the East Coast. And I remember, more than one person saying, just kind of had this image that it's going to be like one big city that rolled down from Boston all the way to DC or something like that. So they were surprised at how rural and somewhat hilly, not as hilly as their area it is. I mean, there were more similarities geographically than they anticipated. And I think the big feeling, and some of you may speak to this better than I can, was that they came with a lot of anxieties and a lot of stereotypes, and were really brave to do so. And they left just feeling like we're people, and we cared about each other, and we all made ourselves vulnerable to each other, and something really solidified through that process, I believe.
At all the events we were at, our Kentucky colleagues asked us to sit at different tables and meet just the local folks who had come to hear us or having breakfast there. Even in a commercial restaurant one time, somebody dragged Jim away and said, come sit and talk to these guys. So they wanted us to be seen in their community, which I thought was very positive. They weren't hiding us. I felt good about that. And there was a lot of sense of they wanted us to mix. Just like we had asked them to mix with you last year, they wanted us to mix with their people and be in conversation. And that was good for us because these were not people trained in dialogue like our folks were by now. So it was very casual and informative.
I just wanted us to talk about the radio station. I wanted to let you know about the radio station that's at Appleshop because you can actually pick it up on your computers. And the reason I thought about it and realized we hadn't talked about it was that they have a show that allows family members of prisoners to be able to call the show to do shout-outs to their family members because as you know, mostly I'm sure you know that the phone calls that get created in prisons are just so expensive that it's very hard for family members to call because it costs a fortune. So they created this show, which I think is on Monday afternoons, where families call and do shout-outs, and they make sure at the prisons that they have, they're able to get the radio stations to hear them. I don't know if anybody else wants to talk about it's a completely volunteer radio show, and I think it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's always going, and that's at Apple Shop. And my impression was it's been going on for a long time. Does anybody remember the call letters?
WMMT. One or two more questions. Way in the back, Tom.
I'll call it out. Apple Shop sounds so wonderful. That's just another thing that makes it sound great. And yet you've said there's serious opposition. What was the basic reason for why people find Apple Shop not worthy?
What one of my Kentucky friends said, well, they just see Apple Shop as the organization that's against everything. And that's why. Well, they're leading the way, pushing the boundaries.
I think it's had some outsiders. Most of the people are from the region who are at Apple Shop, but it's had some outsiders and some outside funding. So it's that fear of the other again, and maybe they're not all Trump voters in Apple Shop. Maybe it's a little more progressive. So I think there's some edges of that cause the separation. Any other thoughts on that? Fred.
I can shut it out.
They gotta hear you back there too, so.
Okay.
Take the mic.
So, what surprised you the most down there? Anything at all? Anything at all, culturally or geographically, or anything that really took you, that you were not expecting?
That's a wonderful question. It's going to be our closing question, but it's such a good one.
My answer is really short. The strength of the women. They were amazing.
Just pass it around.
Okay, let's have
That the community is evolving and that it's not going to stay the same because outside forces are coming in. So we'll see what the next chapter is. And I spent an hour talking to somebody who's working on broadband, so that's going to change everything.
What surprised me was that when there was a difference, like around guns or talking to Glenn, if I began to say, oh, but you're being taken in, I got so upset with myself. Like I realized that the most important thing was caring for her. And I didn't want to let anything tear us apart.
I was so moved by the family connections and the many families with large families, siblings, and the stories of their growing up and then their deaths, that a lot of them were dying early. But the deep family connections, I knew it was true, but witnessing it was really something.
This is a story I told my group, but it's a story I love. Debbie and I ended up on the same flight coming out of Charlotte.
I told my group too.
We were 2 hours late getting out. By the time we were driving the additional 2 hours, we were going to get in at 10 or 11 o'clock, and we started getting phone calls from the various groups saying, well, where are you going to stay tonight? I was due to stay on in Cowan Creek, and Deb was to stay with Gwen. So we ended up going to Gwen's because it would have saved time. So we meet her at the assigned place. She rolls up in her fire engine red pickup with racing stripes. So that is the first, oh, this is pretty interesting. Well, then we got to she had rented a cottage for Deb and Sarah to stay in. So I was an additional person. She rented it because she lives with her mom and her nephew, and there wasn't enough room. So we get there, and there's a couch, and there's a king-size bed. Gwen goes out to her truck. She starts hauling in coats, putting them on the floor. What are you doing? well, I'm going to sleep on these. So we decided we could do better than that. And so the three of us slept in the bed, and Gwen slept on the couch. And as I said to Jeff, I've been sleeping with your wife.
I know Paula mentioned this before, but I was really so stunned by the question that was asked of us. Why did you trust us? I was in the group where that question was asked. I know it was asked in another group too, but it was just so stunning. I mean, none of us had ever thought about being worried about these people coming. Yet that's what they were really worried about. So that was just an amazing thing to learn.
Not a new learning for me, but a visceral, deep understanding of how hard it is to make a living, to make a decent life in a place where opportunity is as limited as it is there. And one guy in particular talking about the 10 years that he had spent going to summer school in pursuit of a degree, so that he could be a teacher.
When we had our tour of Apple Shop, we went down in the basement through many rooms until we reached the vault where they keep all their films, 50 years of documentaries they've done. Before the other half of us was in the vault, we were outside waiting, and while we were waiting, we were told a story. This was exactly in 2018, 50 years since the visit of Robert F. Kennedy to Whitesburg, Kentucky. And two of the women that were in the room with us, Nell and Gwen, had been little girls who had seen Robert Kennedy. They had been lined up in their little dresses after the school. And this really moved me because I was thinking, apparently all of Whitesburg was just, they couldn't wait to see Robert Kennedy. And he was revered. And they felt that he understood them. And I felt like, where's the Democratic Party today that the Democratic Party has lost these people? And so that was a very moving experience for me.
One of the questions that Jim asked in the Shriners Breakfast was, where did the Democratic Party in Kentucky part ways? Because they were all Democrats. They were unionized, Congress, and Democrats.
This is a story I told in our group, but it was quite stunning. The evening we were at Hemphill, where you saw the catering crew that was with Gwen that fed us that night, and the music, and it was just a wonderful evening. Well, Nell who stayed with us, had informed everybody that when they stayed with us, we had done Shabbat that night. And so there we are in the basement of the Hemphill School with the memorial to the dead miners outside and the brand new brick oven inside, and we did Shabbat. Stunning, and an event you don't forget.
One thing that I remember is the willingness of individual people down there to share their stories with me. I made it a point to, when we were at community events, the potlucks and the farmers market and whatnot, to reach out to individuals, just total strangers, and greet them, and they'd open up with these wonderful stories. In many cases, they were traumatic stories, difficulties in their lives, but that's a big takeaway for me.
I guess the thing that I was most surprised of and still kind of processing is the people who work from Kentucky who decided to move there and live there and make a living. There's an architect and his wife who moved to Whitesburg and have made a nice living. And then Tyler, who is a lawyer, went to UVM and has an opportunity to go other places, but has decided to stay there and make a living.
think one sort of visceral experience that was sort of a surprise, or maybe I had an idea about it, was going into the mine and being in the pitch blackness and the cold and feeling the wind blow by you as you were going in through on the whatever you call the thing that brought us in, and they showed us the history of mining in the sequence of audiovisual. And the first section was about what showed an Italian immigrant, and he was in there with his horses, and his son was a little deeper in the mine, and he was talking to his son. And you can hear the horse neighing in the background, and I never really thought about, I thought about humans going underground like that, but I didn't think about also that animals were underground and that young boys were in there working. And so it was a very hands-on, visceral moment to connect all these parts of the history of mining, and then to see how mining changed in just 100 years, from pick and shovel to these big like screw type things that would come and dig out the coal faster than and displaced thousands of miners, and it was kind of mind-boggling to see that.
I guess on last I would say what surprised me the most was the quality of relationships we developed with them. I didn't expect so much transcendence. We have all been so broken since the election, and so angry, so disturbed, so concerned about our country, and the fact that we were able to be with this group of people in a way that transcended that anger and that despair was remarkable to me and a big surprise. So thank you for that question. It's a really wonderful way to end. We're going to have a song that Sarah's going to lead us in, and she'll tell you why she's using this song, and after that we're ready to go. So we want to thank you for the wonderful attendance and your attention and the joy of having you all here with us.
Paula thought that this song would bring you into some of the feelings of us coming together. It's Bright Morning Star. And what's so poignant about it is that when the van came in October, everybody traveling for the long distance, in front of the town hall here, Gwen got everyone together singing this song. So please join in. Bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising, bright morning star arising. Day is a breaking in my soul. Traditional verses, oh, where are our dear mothers? We'll sing fathers, but then we'll add, where are our dear neighbors? And the final verse we'll do is hands across the hills. Oh, where are our dear mothers? Oh, where are our dear mothers? Oh, where are our dear mothers? Day is a breaking in my soul. Our dear fathers.